Good evening, and welcome to the Council Advisory Committee CAC meeting of the 11th of October 2022. This meeting is being held in chambers, and the meeting is being live streamed on Facebook Live. The most up-to-date meeting package is on the Town of Kentville website. And on behalf of Council, I wish to offer our condolences to Deputy Mayor Savage on the passing of her mom. Our thoughts are with you, Deputy Mayor. This meeting is called to order. Have all of the councillors received and reviewed their meeting package? Does any member of council have information pertaining to a matter before this council which has not been publicly circulated? As the Council Advisory Committee, CAC, we will vote as a committee to either send business forward to the council meeting for ratification, return to staff for further information or review, or defeat the recommendation. I will remind members of council that we should continue to be mindful of our decision-making wheel to make balanced and respectful decisions while adhering to our code of conduct. This council, through policy and by motion, has adopted Robert's Rules as our rules of order, our parliamentary procedure, and as the chair of the meeting, it is the chair's responsibility to use those orders to ensure the business of the town is conducted. The council will be voting electronically on all motions except administrative, which will be by show of hands. Are there any conflict of interest issues that council should be aware of before the meeting commences? I note that we have quorum and we have been provided with a proposed agenda. Are there any further additions or deletions to the agenda, CAO?
Thank you, Mayor Snow. Just two quick items. I'll note 8A on the agenda is actually a duplication. That's also being covered off under one of the departmental reports, so 8A can be struck. And 8D is from Mentoring Plus. They're going to actually supply that document for our council meeting, so we can take that off the agenda as well. So 8A and 8D can be removed from the agenda.
Excellent. Thank you, CAO. If I could have a motion to adopt the agenda as amended. Councillor Zabian, thank you, and Councillor Huntley for the second. Thank you. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you. You have the minutes of the September 12th, 2022 CAC meeting were distributed for your approval. If there are no changes, the minutes are approved as distributed. If there are changes, the recording secretary will annotate the minutes in red, and the annotated minutes will be added to the electronic meeting file as approved. Are there any changes? No? All good. Thank you. We'll move on to our presentations, and our first presentation this evening is with regards to the Frugal Moms, and Lisa Rose will be presenting. Lisa, you have 10 minutes, and we do have you under new business for your ask, so the time is yours.
Well, thank you guys so much for your time and talking about my little passion project, and that's what we call it. It's a passion project. It started 13 years ago. My best friend and I created Frugal Moms, teaching people how to coupon, price match, and walk out the store being paid to take your groceries out. The beginning of COVID, we had an apartment building fire here on Heartland Court, which some of you guys may remember, and I called upon my team members and said, okay, what are we going to do? And they thought I was a little bit crazy. What do you mean, what are we going to do? I was a victim of a house fire in 2008 and knew exactly what these people were going through and said, what can we do? In that time, I'm sorry, I don't know how to change on this one, guys. Sorry. Does anybody know how to?
She's not in display mode.
Thank you. There we go. So we took a half an acre of my land and filled it with clothing. I had to buy a tarp as big as a boat to cover it every night. And what I found was when I was coming home, people were underneath the tarp. And I was like, okay, guys, like what's going on here? And the thing was that they could not afford Value Village or Frenchies. And what we were providing is a free service of clothing household items. So we opened it up and I said to my team, I said, okay, what can we do? So we have now locations from Digby to New Minas where people can come get household items, clothing, everything that comes in free with Frugal Moms goes back out free. It's a judgment-free zone. Then we decided to start looking at food, perfectly imperfect food. So if you grew a carrot and it had an extra leg or something like that, we wouldn't throw it away. But the grocery stores do, because that's not the perfect carrot or the perfect apple or the perfect everything. And so what we do is we go around to grocery stores, and bread that expired yesterday, instead of going to compost, goes to what we call a pop-up somewhere in the valley between Digby and New Minas. Again, whatever comes in free goes out free, but we take it a step further. Monica Williams is our canning person, so we teach people the skills of our grandparents, how to can, preserve, dehydrate, and make meals out of things that they're not sure how to use, like chickpeas. So, pardon me. So this shows you guys just like some of our coupon hauls. That was all free. This was all free. We've been in several newspapers. Currently, we are at over 8,500 members of Frugal Moms. We have separate windows. So we have the main page where I do shop with me. So I show you guys what's on sale at Dollarama, what clearance carts are at Superstore. I teach you how to do DIYs on a dime. So if you see something at Winners and you can't afford it, I'm going to show you how to make it out of Dollarama items. We teach people how to live a frugal life with what they have, using the resources they have. So this just shows you, this is actually my house. I live in Kentville, for those of you who don't know, up on Mill Run. And so at any given time, there's food outside. So this is a donation of corn that came in. And to date, I'm not sure if I said it, we're at 83,000 pounds of food that have been recovered since January that has gone out to the public that are suffering from food insecurity. That's, so this just shows you guys a picture. I do anywhere, pardon me, from 100 to 500 kilometers a day on my car, rescuing food and taking it out to the locations. We also do Christmas hampers. We do 75 families and 20 seniors. We make sure that seniors get something, because seniors' income will never increase. They'll never make another dollar. So we make sure that they're taken care of at Christmas time as well. The picture there with the Canada flag, that's just an example of that house fire of what my front yard looked like. And there's the gigantic tarp that I had to take and cover every night to make sure it was covered from the rain. We are a registered nonprofit. We try to bridge the gap between the food bank and us. So the food bank allows you every 6 to 8 weeks, you're allowed to come every day to any location and come grab whatever's in. We promote what comes in by showing on Facebook visually a video, here's what's here, come grab what you guys can use. Pardon me. The day before Fiona, we had 800 tubs of ice cream in Kentville. 800 tubs of ice cream. The first wave, we served 120 people with ice cream, turkey, sausages, bread products, jams, anything that they could use while the power was out. And then we had a second wave later on that day. So over 800 tubs of ice cream went out free to people that needed it. So these are just some of the pictures that you guys are seeing is like, this is Monica's truck. There are days that I'm like, I don't know. If you look at her tire there, guys, and she's like, we got this. I'm like, I don't know that we got this. But that's the amount of food that would go to waste into our landfill versus feeding people that need it. So again, we have many vendors. Yeah, rain doesn't stop us. We have a joke. If it's raining, it must be tomato and cucumber day. We rescue anywhere from 1,000 to 4,000 pounds of cucumbers and tomatoes weekly and distribute them from Digby straight on down through to New Minas. And then again, we teach them how to make salsa, spaghetti sauce, tomato paste, all those things, and show them how to preserve these tomatoes besides just salads and sandwiches. I think that, oh, okay. So recently the PEI potatoes were supposed to be destroyed. We had 500 bags, 10-pound bags of potatoes in my front yard, peanut butter. We've rescued from grocery stores. When Swiss Chalet had their fire, their stuff was still good in the fridge. We rescued it and got it out to people. Because we have food handlers and canning and stuff like that, we are able to break big jugs of things down and give it to people. We've had pet food stores message us because some people want their pets, but they can't afford them. And so we try to help them keep their companions by rescuing dog food that may be expired but still good, and making sure that people are able to keep their pets at home. Some of these pictures are of Digby and so on. So you guys are kind of getting an idea, a visual idea of what we do. Now this is my car after one day. 571.1 kilometers is how many kilometers I put on my car while driving around rescuing food. So I'm the director. Tasha is my best friend. Her and I are the ones that created it. I missed that part, but I was diagnosed with cancer and had to go off work and was like, how am I going to pay my bills and keep my family going? And that's when we learned the couponing and shared that with others. Monica is our secretary, but she's also our canning and preserving. Sarah is our Middleton location. She has clothing, household, food rescue, and she also does canning and gardening. Rosemary is our New Minas location. So on Highbury Road over by the movie theater, we use those pop-up garages. And we put clothing racks in, we build a flooring out of pallet and free wood and make it so that they can go in and shop for whatever they need. So that's the New Minas. This is Irene. Irene is our Greenwood location, also food, clothing, households. She is learning canning. Kate is actually a cookbook author that lives in Kentville, who has joined our team recently to teach people how to use things that they're not sure how to use. So when we get food rescue, sometimes these people don't know what to do with things, like what do I do with all this kale? What do I do with this? And then what she does, naan bread is the number one. Yes. Naan and baguettes, they don't know what to do with them, so she shows recipes on how to use those, using items that you would have in your home. Wendy is our Digby girl, so she will come down every other week, grab food, and drive it back up to Digby to make sure that people in that area. Melinda is on our fundraising team. We have many fundraising projects on the go. And there's some more of the food rescue breaking stuff down. So the one thing I really want to express to you guys is the motto of moms, Frugal Moms, it's one family helping another. Not one person that you just seen there gets paid for their time. So we put in anywhere from 20 to 60 hours a week, and nobody gets paid. It's about helping that mom or one family helping another family. And this is the Middleton location, as you guys can see. The gardening and the clothing and household there. This is Irene's.
That's her own location.
Yeah, similar to the new one. Rosemary's in New Minas. Sam's.
Oh,
And, that was your garden, Monica, sorry.
that was mine.
Monica's location, so she's got the biggest building. Torbrook is happening. That place is very, very busy. But to give you guys an idea, one of the pictures that hasn't been added that we recently took, on the day of the ice cream before the storm, when I pulled in my driveway, I couldn't get in my driveway. It looked like Walmart on my street. And if you know where Mill Run is, it's a circle. There was parking there. That is the need for food in our area right now. That is the need. As soon as I put a video, you can hear the cars coming around the corner. And the thing is that I find the most is that they could come in a fancy car and everybody's like, why are you giving them food? Because they might be driving that car, but that may be every dollar they have to keep that car so they can go to work, and they need to feed their families. So it's a very judgment-free. I don't ask them for their income. I don't ask them for their circumstance. If they show up and they're hungry, then they get what they need when they leave. So, and again, more of the truck pictures. We have lots. Canning, like I said, we're losing the skills of our grandparents, and it's very important for us to teach those skills before they're gone. My grandmother is 92, and she asked me for green tomatoes this year so she can make chow. She is 92. If she wants to make chow and teach me how to do that, I'm going to learn that, because someday I'll wish that I had taken the time and learned those skills. So in closing, that's what we are, is like-minded moms just wanting to help one family. We all have our own stories, our own strengths, and our own experiences, and we bring it to the table to help other people every day.
All right, thank you very much,
You're
Lisa.
welcome.
Are there any questions for Lisa? Or Monica is here as well. Monica, welcome. Councillor Zabian.
Thank you, Mayor Snow. Thanks, Lisa. That was a great presentation, and remarkable that you guys all work together. So when you guys set up these pop shops, you just do them in your homes, pretty much, or?
Every location is at our homes. We
Okay.
we have fridges, freezers, tables to put stuff out on.
Okay.
And then, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Are there any other? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Lisa. That was a great presentation, and the work that you do is to be admired, so thank you for what you do. That's incredible, actually, you and your team. I'm just wondering, have you ever partnered up with any of the other groups in the area? Like, when I think of Open Arms, or I think of the Portal, or anything, is there any overlap between you and them, or are you just autonomous?
So sometimes we do work on certain projects, like we just did back to school hampers. So the Rotary came in and brought some school, like we do back to school hampers to make sure kids have food for the first week of school and backpacks. And then we try to help take care of their fees at schools to make sure that stress is off moms. So that is something that we do work on other projects with other nonprofits.
Okay, great,
Yeah.
thank you. Thanks very much.
Councillor York.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the work that you've been doing. Is your work, do you have advertising channels outside of social media? Or have you made partnerships in the community through like radio stations and things that could help maybe focus on a drive to bring in money? I know to add to your very full plate, but I guess wondering if you've been able to make headway there.
We have not. It
Okay.
has been something we've tried. We've tried advertising on, what's that site? Valley Events. We've tried posting on there, but unfortunately have never been put to the next level to advertise. So we mostly rely on Facebook, Instagram to advertise those type of things. Yeah.
I assumed word of mouth was probably quite popular.
Very strong in the valley, I gotta tell you. As soon as one person knows that there's food in one location. Yeah, Monica had 1,000 pounds of food in Torbrook today. So, yeah.
All right, are there any further questions? Lisa, Monica, thank you very much for your time, and as I said, you're on our agenda later in the meeting, and so we'll be looking at it then. And when Councillor York asked you that question, you should probably check out her particulars, and she is probably very interested in helping out.
All right, thank you guys so much.
Not that I'm putting you on the spot, Jillian, but. All right, our next presentation this evening is the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid at HWA. And it is actually our working group who is presenting tonight, and Tom Herman. And I notice he's got a few folks in the audience to help out with questions. So Tom and working group, welcome. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for the work that you do with regards to our green spaces here in Kentville.
Well, thank you very much. I circulated already a brief proposal, which you've seen. I'll speak to that proposal, but I would also like to take 2 minutes before I do that to provide a little bit of background. I think all of you are aware in this first slide of the kinds of challenges that we face on the planet. I circle 3 here that are particularly important. The first, habitat loss, is one of which we've long been aware, and we're beginning to address that. The second is all of a sudden on everyone's mind. The third, however, I suspect is one that you might be scratching your head about. Globalization is, of course, refers to the ways in which we move things around the planet rather quickly. Whether it be materials, information, money, culture, but the most insidious kind of globalization is ecological globalization, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. But collectively, these things are inextricably linked, and collectively they define this new geological epoch that we live in now, an epoch which is dominated by humans and human activity, the Anthropocene. These 3 things drive the global biodiversity crisis that we hear about, which is significant, and ultimately they're going to determine our legacy, how we address these 3 issues. The one I want to talk about is that last one, globalization. One of the things that we've globalized is the movement of species, and as a result, we have moved a number of organisms to places where they did not evolve. As a result, they often wreak havoc. Now, this slide, most of you are probably not familiar with any of the things on this slide, but if you take a walk at lunchtime down to Miners Marsh, you'll be able to see at least, I can guarantee you can see at least 4 of them, and the 5th one might swim under the bridge while you're not looking. All of these have profound influences on ecosystems, on our local ecosystems, except for one in this picture, which isn't here yet, and that's that shiny green beetle in the middle. And as lovely as it is, when it arrives, it's right now in Upper Sackville, it's going to kill probably 90% of the ash trees in Kentville and across the province, the emerald ash borer. But I want to speak about one particular invasive species, and we call these invasive species, that is, they're species that come from elsewhere, outside their native range, and ones which have a profound influence on the ecosystem in which they find themselves. And this particular one is the subject of tonight's presentation, the hemlock woolly adelgid. It's a small aphid-like insect, about 1 millimeter long. It's native to Japan, first recorded in North America in 1951 in Virginia, first recorded in Nova Scotia in 2017 in Yarmouth County. The range of hemlock is shown here in green and the adelgid in red, and there's green beneath that red. You can see that from the initial detection point in Virginia, the beast has spread both south and well north, and it's spread along the eastern seaboard, and climate change is likely going to accelerate its move further north. In fact, if you look at the adelgid in Nova Scotia, this is a map from 2020, and the spots in red are detection sites. The spots in blue are places that were searched without detection. You can now move the red about 80 kilometers to the east because Kentville is on the edge of that. You can see Kentville at the top. The adelgid has expanded its range as far as Kentville is now here in the Kentville Gorge. We found it there in the spring. I'm not going to bother you with the details of this life cycle. Leave it to say it's complex. The interesting thing about it is that this insect is active when most insects are not. Its active period is really from the fall into the late spring. And then in the summer, it just hangs out and goes dormant. It's tremendously fecund, and it doesn't have to worry about finding a mate because they reproduce asexually. They're all females. There are no males. Males are completely superfluous. And they're 2 generations per year. So the reproductive potential of one of these tiny little insects is enormous. Yes, small but mighty. The small insect feeds at the base of the hemlock needles, and it kills the needles and the buds and ultimately causes the needles to drop and the stems to die back. And in late summer, there's an active phase where they crawl around, and then they go dormant. They lock their mouth parts into the hemlock, but they just sit until they become active again in the fall. And then they work their way through the winter and spring, accumulating that wool that you saw in the first picture, and as you can see in the upper left, in the photo in the upper left. That wool actually insulates the insect against the cold temperatures in the winter, also keeps it free from some predators, and also allows it to create an ovisac for its eggs, and you get an idea of just how fecund these are. That's 1 egg sac from one adelgid, and of course you go through 2 life cycles in a year. You do the math, you're up to your elbows in hemlock woolly adelgid in no time. This is what they do, that mighty little 1 millimeter long insect. This was a healthy, mature hemlock forest, and those trees are not some deciduous tree having lost its leaves in the winter. Those are dead hemlock trees. And it has done this all across the range in North America, and it is doing this right now as we speak down the valley and around Kedzie, all through Yarmouth and Queens and Shelburne counties. It takes up to 20 years, but most damage is done in 4 to 10 years in terms of killing trees. All sizes and ages of hemlock are vulnerable, and it's naturally spread because it's so small. It can be blown around. It can be carried by mammals or birds, small birds. And of course, we're really good at carrying it on our firewood, on our logs that we move from place to place, or on infested nursery stock that we inadvertently move around. Well, how does one deal with this? And the reason I went into that introduction about invasive species at the outset is that this is one of many, but this is a sign of things to come, and I think it's important to keep that in mind. But in terms of dealing with this particular pest, we have talked about a strategy, developed a strategy, and we think the most appropriate thing to do is to look at this in the short, intermediate, and long term. And in the short term, we're promoting chemical treatments for this, which is well demonstrated, works well elsewhere in the range of this pest. In the intermediate control, in the intermediate term, we're suggesting that we develop biocontrol processes, programs, because we have the station, the research station here. We have potential rearing facilities available. But that's a longer-term solution. And in the very long term, of course, breeding resistant trees. When I say long term, we're probably talking 30 to 50 years plus. In your handout, you have this as part of the two-pager. I'm not going to go into the detail of this. This is just two options of the chemical treatment specifically for the Kentville Gorge. The gorge has hemlock in early stages of development. They're relatively young, up to 70 years or so. The ravine on the other side of town is an old growth hemlock forest. It has hemlock trees, some of which are probably over 300 years old, and astounding trees. Both forests are vulnerable. Both forests deserve to be protected. This is specifically for the gorge, and the two options depend on how much you can, what quantities of the two suggested or recommended treatments that you use. One is injected, the EcoJet or Imajet. It's injected directly in the tree. The other is sprayed around the base of the bark, the base of the tree, the basal bark spray. There are limits to how much you can apply that spray in terms of how many trees you can treat, because it is more exposed and there is more likely to be some loss of material into the surrounding soil. So these are just two treatment options. The point being that they're both very similar in total cost, and that's because the cheaper basal bark spray requires professional help to apply it, and that costs more than volunteers. The injection can be done by volunteers. Scope and scale of this challenge are huge, and no question. The town of Kentville, municipality of Kings, research station, CFIA, Acadia, Blondin, Naturalist Service organizations all can play a role and must play a role. But the ravine and the gorge are both really important ecological, they're recreational and educational resources. And there are huge opportunities to raise public awareness about how to tackle those troubling triplets in the first slide. So embracing this control effort would certainly enhance the town's leadership role and provide a model for other municipalities to follow. But I would like to make a last shout out to volunteers and the power of volunteers. Volunteers are essential because the scale of this is enormous. Sporting Lake Nature Reserve in Yarmouth County used volunteers entirely to treat an old growth hemlock forest with injection as shown in these slides. And they did so by crowdsourcing the funding for it completely. That's quite an astounding project, well worth checking it out. I've provided some additional information here. You can check the links and be happy to answer questions. Thanks.
Tom, thank you very much for that, that presentation. Are there any questions for Tom with regards to this? And Director Bedingfield will be speaking further on this during her reporting period. Councillor Zabian, I see yours, but I'm not seeing it here.
Oh, am I on?
No, I can't do anything.
Anyway, I'll ask. Thanks, Tom. Good information. Just wondering, those two treatments, do they know or have they done studies on which one is more effective? Or I know that the one that was less expensive is a 2-year
Well, the one that's less expensive, the reason, I did the comparison between a 1 year and 2 year treatment, because in 1 year, you can only apply, when we looked at we've already assessed the trees in the gorge, so we know how many trees are there and what the basal area is and how much spray we need to use and so on. But there are limits to how much spray you can put in 1 year using the Zytec, which is the basal bark spray. So it turns out that you can spray about 16% of the trees in a single year. So if you spread the treatment over 2 years, you can spray 32% of the trees with the Zytec. But in fact, it hardly saves any money because we're using professional sprayers to do it. It lasts, actually the Zytec is cheaper, but it actually lasts a little longer. So these sprays last 4 to 7 years in terms of their effectiveness, which buys some time for the second stage of our recommendation of biocontrol to introduce native predators to control the aphid, or the adelgid, I should say. And not to split hairs. But the costs are, the basal bark spray, because the basal bark spray is sprayed externally, there's more likely to be some material that gets off the tree into the surrounding soil. That said, the chemicals recommend on your dog ticket.
And I know that this has been a long process to get it to us. So thank you very much to your group.
Well, thank you, and thank you for coming to our meeting. We really appreciate that. It's important to have that linkage.
Councillor Gerard.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Tom. So I'm going to repeat something that Councillor Zabian asked about its effectiveness. I know over the last 10 or 12 years, Health Canada has done some switching up on things. So when you say it's effective, I'm going from a landscaper perspective to say the stuff that nobody wanted that we used to spray lawns with was more effective than the stuff that we use now, the Fiesta. I know now we have to use way more chemical than we used to have to use. When you say this stuff is effective, is it, if you spray it, it will kill the adelgid? And if so, does it also kill the eggs?
Yeah, good question. I can't tell you about its effectiveness on the eggs. It certainly kills the adelgid. I would say that there are a few issues that we're dealing with here, and I think important to keep in mind. One is that we are on the front of an expanding range of a species. So its exposure to this chemical would be fairly novel, so that the effectiveness is higher. Now, whether or not down the road, if we sustain background populations of the adelgid, Whether it develops resistance, that's a good question. But at that point, I'm hoping that we've got these other approaches, the biocontrol, which is an intermediate term approach, where and there are 2 insect predators of this adelgid that are Canadian natives, but they're from BC. But that counts. It counts with Agriculture Canada, that's for sure. And because otherwise we'd never get permission. It'd be 30 years before we got permission to use them, and by then it would be academic. So they do, I mean, there is that issue of resistance that you always worry about with pests. But hopefully between chemicals and the development of biocontrol programs down the road. The biocontrol program sounds like a great, and I'm a huge fan, as some of you may know. I'm not particularly fond of applying chemicals to ecosystems. I am an ecologist. But in this case, there seems to be no immediate alternative. The alternative is to lose the hemlocks. And the hemlock is one of our foundational trees in the Acadian forest, as you know, like beech, and red spruce, and sugar maple, and yellow birch. Most of those trees are under some kind of attack. Beech certainly is under considerable attack from 2 introduced pests, invasive pests. We've lost our elms to an invasive pest. We're going to lose all of our ashes, virtually all of our ashes, to an invasive pest. It's quite sobering, and that's why I spent the 2 minutes at the beginning of my presentation just to put this in perspective, to set the reference, to set a frame, to appreciate that this issue of ecological globalization is huge, and although it's flown under the radar, and most of you probably weren't even aware of it as an issue, it is certainly the most insidious kind of globalization, and it is the one that's going to last the longest. So we won't see the effects of cultural and economic and information globalization after we're gone from this planet, but we will see the effects of ecological globalization. It will leave a permanent mark on the planet, and long after our species is gone. And that's pretty sobering. So I think that just kind of underscores the issue, the immensity of the issue we're dealing with. And it changes the questions a little bit sometimes. So no, we're not going to, I mean, we're going to be facing invasive species, there's no question about it. But we have these magical hemlock forests right in the town of Kentville. I mean, where in Nova Scotia can you take a public bus to visit an old growth forest?
Yeah.
I mean, it's astounding. It's an astounding resource. And the town, Rachel's work's been spectacular in terms of promoting this. But it's, you know, it's a resource that has to be stewarded, and it deserves our attention, I think. And the young, I mean, in 200 years, the Kentville Gorge is going to be a spectacular hemlock forest as well. But we have to nurture it to that stage.
Thank you.
Councillor York.
Thank you. So you kind of alluded to it, and I am just, for my own curiosity, the predators that you spoke of, is there a way, and it'll become glaringly obvious that I studied history and not biology here in just a moment, but is it possible to be more aggressive with our approach and do a simultaneous poisoning and introduction of a bug without killing the predator? And then also, what is the predator?
This shows the value of studying history.
You're very generous, thank you.
That question is bang on, because you get the context piece really well as a historian. No, there isn't a simple answer to this. It's complicated because, but you should expect that answer as a historian, because otherwise I'd just be making it up, you know. I mean, just to assuage your concern. But you're right that. If we're going to develop biocontrol programs, we have to maintain something for the biocontrol organisms to eat. Mm-hmm. And they eat this adelgid, which means that we're not going to be able to kill all the adelgids if we want to introduce biocontrol. So this is part of the design of the biocontrol program. We are looking at the Kentville Ravine as a prime candidate for the development of that program of biocontrol. In part because of the proximity to AAFC and the facilities, and in part because it's, it's federal land and so on. So there's that AAFC connection. But it's going to be expensive. But biocontrol is going to be far more expensive than this may seem expensive. Biocontrol is definitely more expensive. I can't put a finger at this point on the cost, but it will be more expensive. But I think the two go hand in hand, and I mean, we can maintain reservoirs of adelgid and still control and save individual trees. So we can, you can combine the two.
Okay.
But especially with, with when you're injecting trees, because with the injection method, that toxin is going nowhere else than in the tree. So if you're not feeding directly on that tree, you're safe from the treatment. So you can maintain adelgids in a forest that is being treated for adelgids. So you would have to sacrifice some trees perhaps, or hopefully, trying to get the balance right between the predators, obviously.
We don't want
And
mongoose
keep in
coming in.
mind that in Japan, the native range of this adelgid, it doesn't kill hemlock trees because it's evolved with all of these predators. The problem with invasive species and globalized species is that we take them out of the environment in which they've spent millions of years evolving, and we've put them in a novel environment in which there are no predators or parasites necessarily with which they've evolved, and this is why their populations often explode. So their competitors, their predators, their parasites are not there. And so when you've got a novel organism in an ecosystem, there's always unpredictable elements, and you never know, what's going. Something might happen. You never know what. But the best thing we can do if we're monitoring it, if we have lots of people on the ground, lots of volunteers, it's easy to monitor this organism. It's very easy to see, as you saw in that first slide with those white woolly masses, hard to miss. We think we can, it's kind of a stick handling process where you're trying to put these treatments together and make them work. But I think the ravine is probably the place for that experiment. I think we'll probably have more, unless Kentville has an enormous amount of funding available to fund a biocontrol program, which I'm sure you do, but
Maybe.
you're gonna have my tax dollars for it anyway.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Worship. Thanks, Tom. So you're the expert at this. I'm not, so I'm relying on your expertise to make a decision on it. So you're recommending a 1-year course of action. And if we follow that recommendation, when might we have to repeat this course of action?
We'd be looking probably at 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah, I would say,
Okay.
probably 5 years.
All right. Thank
And,
you.
and hopefully by then we'll have some idea, we'll have a program in place in the ravine, and I'm hoping at that point we will be developing a biocontrol program so we can then look at, well, do we want to spray all the trees? Do we want to spray some of the trees? But I think, this is an insidious little beast. And its ability to kill hemlocks is, you can see this down the valley. It's coming in Shelburne, Yarmouth counties. Some of the stands of mature old growth hemlock, they're just gone. They're skeleton, like the photo, they're
Yeah,
skeletons.
shame.
And,
Thank you.
and they'll be replaced, if we do nothing, they'll be replaced by one of those 7 invasive species I showed you on that first slide. Yeah, there's a candidate just waiting to move in as soon as they get the space, and they're right there on the edge of Kentville Gorge. As a matter of fact, they're already in Kentville Gorge, waiting for trees to fall over.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, Tom, you certainly engaged the group and lots of great conversations. So again, thank you so very much for the work that you do, for being here tonight and bringing your team with you. We truly appreciate it. And as Director Bedingfield and I were saying today, when we've got a question, we know a guy. And you're that guy. So thank you for being our guy, and thank you for being here. And as I said, Rachel will be bringing this forward on her report tonight, and then further onto council. So
Great.
stay tuned.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Very much appreciated.
Great, thank you. All right, we had a little technical difficulty with our microphone system, but a reboot, and we seem to be up and running again. So moving right along, the directors have provided their reports to council for review, and will provide an update and receive questions from council. And councillors, you may direct your questions directly to the directors when they're at the podium. And the reports will be presented and are part of the record of the meeting. Only items of new business arising from the reports will be taken for motion. And CAO Tro, could you please introduce our department reports and recommendations?
Thank you, Mayor Snow. So tonight, as we always do, we're starting off with finance. So Director Kroll will have the director's report and her projection report.
Yes, thank you and good evening to everybody. It's great to be here to present you the financial information for the town of Kentville for the month ended September 30th. We're looking at a benchmark this month of 50% if everything was averaged evenly over the year. Overall revenue exceeds the average at 85.0% recorded. Total taxation is reporting at 100%, so the final levy has been sent out and recorded. The federal payment in lieu of tax arrived in September, and it arrived $8,700 under budget. Under conditional transfers, federal funding was received from Canada Summer Jobs Program for about $18,500. We also received $1,700 from Sport Nova Scotia for the purchase of tennis rackets as part of Recreation Department's equipment loan program. Tie-ins, or Tourism Nova Scotia, forwarded $4,500 to offset staffing expenditures at the Visitor Information Center. Under financing and transfers for the revenue section, all budgeted transfers from the operating reserve have occurred at this time. On the expenditure side of the ledger, we've exceeded the benchmark at 56.1%. Under general administration, we've recorded Section 69, which is low-income expenditures, the Section 71, which is the charitable organizations expenditures, and the grants expenditures have also been recorded. Under firefighting, we've paid the fire department 1/2 of the area rate. We've also paid them 1/2 of their operating costs, and 100% of the hydrant area rate has been transferred to the Kentville Water Utility. Under debt charge, principal exceeds the threshold but reflects the debt repayment schedule. Principal debt repayments are complete for the year, just for council's information. And all budgeted transfers to the various reserves have taken place at this time. Under the summary of outstanding taxes, as I mentioned, the final levy has been recorded and the due date was October 3rd. Current tax outstanding at October 3rd is $1.3 million, and this compares to last year's figure of $2.1 million. Schedules E and F for the perpetual fund. We're looking at the statement of financial position showing the fund at $13.4 million at cost. And at the top of page 4, you can see the breakdown of financial instruments between cost and market value. You can see the statement of reserves, the information on interest and dividends paid into the fund. And the last schedule that I have is Schedule G, which is the capital investment plan for 22-23. At the date of writing, 13.8%, or $627,738 has been recorded in the capital program. So that concludes my report from the Finance Department for September 30.
Excellent, thank you very much, Director Kroll. Are there any questions for the director? No questions.
Cool. Now we're going into the projection report, this is the first projection report. This is extrapolated to March 31st as at September 30th. So just bear this in mind. This is early information we know to date. Oops, don't touch the mic. Revenue was increased in this first report $83,000, and this is where this comes from. Taxes are going to be down. We project them to be down $500 only. The main reason for it is Alliance revenue arrived $1,300 under budget. Taxes we expect will be somewhere around $700 over budget, and we received an extra $100 from farm acreage. Payments in lieu of tax, I spoke of this before. Right now, we've only received the federal payment in lieu of tax. That's under budget $8,700. The province, by the way, has not sent their payment in lieu of tax at this time. Own source revenue, I'm projecting that's going to be over budget, $50,400. While we have some small increases in permits and rentals, the big kicker here is a $50,000 lift in bank interest, and this is purely due to the lift in interest rates and the money that we have on deposit. Unconditional transfers are up $11,800. HST rebate arrived $11,300 over budget, and the Nova Scotia Power Grant came $500 over budget. On conditional transfers, I've increased that $30,000. Canada Summer Jobs has paid us $18,500. The Province Department of Justice has paid $5,300 for Kentville Police Service to do some training. Sport Nova Scotia, I mentioned this before, paid $1,700 for tennis rackets. And Tyans, the Tourism Industry Association of Nova Scotia, sent the town $4,500 for wages at the VIC. All told, add those all up, it adds up to $83,000. Expenditures are increased, though, at $31,200 in this first projection report. General administration is projected to be over $9,000. Office expenditures will be over $6,700 for general insurance premiums. The programs section will be over $3,300. Most of this relates to the grants section, $4,500 over budget just in that one section. That's because the Physician Navigator project grant was added after the budget had been set. We have the police being over budget, $18,500. Office expenses also will have an increase of $2,700 for general insurance premiums. But the communication section will be over budget $20,800 because of a missed billing that Bridgewater didn't send us from last October. So we've had to pay that bill, and that's going to set that section over budget $20,800. The chief has discounted the program section, $5,000. There'll be savings in the law section. The chief has discounted prosecution, $2,000, and legal, $2,000. Under transportation, we're looking at a $30,900 lift there. We'll have common services increase $1,600 for general insurance premiums, but the road section street lighting will be up $36,700 as Nova Scotia Power missed sending us 3 months of our street lighting bill from the months of January to March. We will have savings, however. I had to pay those bills. We'll have savings, however, in transit of $7,400. King's Transit surplus has been paid back to us, $7,100, and we have some savings in King's point-to-point transit of $300. Public Health will provide savings of $24,700. Housing Nova Scotia has provided early estimations of expenses for 22-23, so I've booked those based on those estimations from that organization. And recreation will be over budget a very small amount, $1,500, mostly in administration for general insurance and some legal charges in that particular section. And programs will be over $3,300, mostly related to the Canada Cup. And facilities will provide savings of $3,200. All parks and playgrounds have been reduced with an overage in the swimming pool. So add those all up, and you'll come up with a projected increase in expenditures of $31,200. If you add our increase in revenue and our increase in expenditures together, you will come up with a projected surplus for March 31st, 2023, as we've determined as September 30, of $51,800. And that's my report on the first projections.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Director. Are there any questions for the Director with regards to this projection report? All right, you got off scot-free tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And moving right along, Director Gentleman has sent her regrets. If there are any questions with regards to the report, the CAO is prepared to respond to them. Councillor Zabian.
Thank you. CEO, do you know if the traffic study has been done in McDougall Heights yet regarding the Bryson development?
I don't know if it is completed. I know there was some work underway. So I'll follow up on that and we'll get you the answer.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions with regards to the planning and development report? Nothing? All right, moving right along, Community Economic Development Coordinator's Report. If there's any questions for that, CAO has all the magical answers.
Can I make one comment? Just one comment. Folks, of course, see the pumpkin people around town. Want to make sure we give a shout out to Jerry and all the work that he does. Folks are aware we had a couple of pumpkins that had an unfortunate demise, and Jerry swooped in and put things back together, even such that there was a Halifax radio station gave him a shout out. So, these are folks who are going above and beyond, and we want to make sure we recognize them for the amazing work we do.
Excellent. Thank you, CAO. I think it's always amazing when you're watching people look at the pumpkin people, how that look of sheer joy, and it just keeps going on year after year. So our next report comes from Director Bedingfield with regards to Parks and Recreation.
It's territorial. Good evening, Council. Just a few things I wanted to point out in my report. The first one, sending a big thanks to Rockwell Home Hardware once again, and their partnership with Tree Canada. They donated trees to us again this year. They were planted down to replace some of the shade trees that exist around KCA School on that soccer field there. So we're quite excited that in a number of years they will actually provide shade, so we're really grateful for them. Just to note that the arena is now open for the season. We've had the condenser and the new compressor installed, and public skates are starting to pick up, along with all of the user groups that are accessing the space. Just one thing to note under community outreach, we do have, and we've advertised this a lot, but I do want to point it out here that we've offered a new service in order to be able to communicate with all different types of people, and that is the Kentville Rec Text. That's something that I've mentioned here a few times, but you are able to go to our website and text the number that is available there and text the word REC, and you will get updates directly to your phone. I think it's important to note that this information or this need to have information right in your pocket came to us. It was actually the Frugal Moms who reminded me of this, because when we talked to single moms during the pandemic who were already outside of their means, they don't have the time to go searching for information, and so this service was actually created because of their feedback. So I just want to push that out there. And then quickly, under the accessibility plan, we did have our last meeting. We talked about the Rick Hansen certification program and the audits that will be going on in municipal facilities. I've had a number of chances to meet with the accessibility directorate and talk about their updated standards, and also the evaluation process that will be used. So as we move forward on that evaluation piece, the town of Kentville will have its own evaluation matrix that we're able to follow to ensure that not only are we meeting the requirements of the province, but that we're meeting our own needs that we've laid out for us within the accessibility plan. And that's my report.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? And yes, there are. Councillor York.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your report, Director Bedingfield. I had some comments. Whatever, you can come over here. It's fine. I had some questions and comments and a few concerns from community members wondering about public skate times and making them perhaps more accessible than the times that they're presently offered. Is that going to change as the season evolves? Or is it a staffing issue that we're kind of stuck and hampered by that? Just with weekend and evening skate times for people who are working in the current structure.
More ideal, yeah. What you see up there now is what we had at that moment as the bookings were coming in, but I do know that all the facility folks are working on getting more public skates to make them more accessible. We try and aim for 11 public skates a week. So we're going to push to get up to that standard again.
Perfect.
And make sure that some are available on the weekend for sure. And I believe that email was sent today from the arena folks, so I encourage people to check back to the website, and we will put it out on social media, or you can sign up for RecText. It was a good plug.
And also, speaking of RecText, and perhaps this is not a question for you, but it comes out of your report, so my apologies. But is RecText able to expand into something that's more emergency services oriented as well? Are we able to piggyback on that service so people can get like alerts about Hurricane Fiona things, for example, or safety issues through like through the police services? Are we able to piggyback on a system similar to that for town emergencies? So that Twitter isn't used as the
Yeah,
means of communication?
I think it's a conversation we can have. It's a service, Ashley's the one that knows all about this, but it's a service that we pay a membership to, and then you pay per text, and right now that comes out of our communications. And I think we have close to 300 people right now on that text, so it's good to kind of keep pushing it, but I mean, it's there as a way to communicate for the town.
Okay, cool.
So it's certainly something to talk about. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I don't have a better answer to that, other than
It's also probably not the appropriate question to be asking the recreation director. We did well together, good job.
Thank you.
Counselor Zabian.
We'll get through it.
Thank you. Thanks, Director. I don't want to be redundant. I got a lot of correspondence from people in the last week about the Rink 2. Just wondering how far in advance are most of those groups? Like, have they booked their dates? Because it would be nice to have, you know, a weekend morning or a Saturday morning where people could go in with their families. I know you try to coordinate everybody, all these groups, but I mean, the 3 to 4 is kind of a hard time because kids get home from school at 3 and then they've got to have their snack, and the older ones don't get home probably till closer to 4. So it's kind of not an ideal time if you've got kids. Wouldn't most of those groups kind of have booked their time or set up so that you knew that, like, say, Sunday morning was free or Saturday morning, or there was a certain time where you could kind of designate it as an hour for people to come in and free skate or whatever the options are?
So depending on the time of season, the schedule is ever evolving.
Okay.
And this time of year, there's people who are doing tryouts and early ice, and then they get into their regular season. So this actually happens every year, where there tends to be a bit more packed on the front end, and then we move into regular season. So you will be seeing updates on
Okay.
public skates.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Maxwell.
Thank you, Director. I just had, I had two questions. One was about skating, of course, but everybody's covered that. We all had a letter today concerning the lack of preparation on the main ball field for the October 8th game. And I'm just wondering if you could shed a little light on what happened in that situation, because it's very unlike us to not have the ball field prepared for the Wildcats playoff games. So.
I can't speak to this incident specifically, but what I can say is that now that our arena is open, two of our full-time staff that were in the parks are now in the arena full-time. Our full-time parks person is spending the next 2 months making pumpkin people. So that has left us with one part-time, full-time staff who's here until the end of November. So we are in a bit of a labor crisis. We're not alone in that. And it is something as we move forward that, you know, we will be bringing to council to address. There's also a standard of expectation in Kentville, understandably, that doesn't necessarily exist in other jurisdictions in terms of the facilities and fields. So these are other conversations, is that if we want to maintain the standard that people have come to enjoy, then we're going to have to talk about cost and labor, and or we need to, you know, what Tom said, and kind of lean into community support a bit more. There's lots of different ways to look at this. It certainly also helps if we have conversations around salary, because it's not even that we don't have the positions available, is that people don't want to work for the money that we have to offer.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Worship. Thanks, Rachel. Just the piece there about the homelessness continuing to impact the parks. Oftentimes if I go to the Marsh in the morning, especially if it's early, I do sometimes, and more so now in seeing it than I did earlier in the summer. So I'm just wondering if that is something, obviously, that you're having discussions with Kentville Police with and things like that, but is there any discussion around what are some, like a project we could do, or are you working with the portal, or I don't know, that just really stuck out to me in your report. And I think I know CEO Troke has said more and more is happening around our town, and I'm just wondering, what can we do? What can we do? What can we offer? How can we help?
I will start, and then if CIO Troke wants to jump in here. I think there actually is a lot going on. I think the problem is much larger than anyone can even grasp at the moment. You know, again, the presentation by the Frugal Moms Group, it's just growing. The need is continually growing. And it does impact us on every level. We work closely with KPS. Our frontline staff in the parks are often the first ones on the scene. The shelter is often full and overflowing. The portal works with youth, which is really great, but we're seeing a whole different demographic. We're seeing seniors that are unhoused. We're seeing families of 4 with 2 working parents that are unhoused. It's constant. You know, there's the immediate shelter need, there's the medium term, and then there's the long term. So the work that was presented, I believe, last council around, you know, potential for a Kentville Housing Action Plan is something that's really important and is going to have serious impact. The work that we're doing with Homeless No More in the Valley, in terms of building off of the success that we had when we focused on youth homelessness, which is actually, there's a lot of successes there. That's going to have a larger impact. It takes a multifaceted approach. We're just one player in it. I think what Parks and Recreation has to offer is what we bring to the table is the ability to dignify the process of working with folks who are unhoused in our parks. It absolutely is an issue. We don't want to have tents set up in Miners Marsh. That's not the goal. But what we can offer is a way to work with folks to help them find supports that connect them to different people and do it in a manner that's dignified. It is heartbreaking.
It is.
It is heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is. Thank you. Thanks.
And so I think the director did. I think the director did a great job of touching on that. I think a couple of pieces. You know, first of all, we have a countrywide issue, and you're even seeing articles of folks who are leaving the city to come to places like Kentville because there may be an opening or two here and there, and so I think the 2 pieces I would touch on is, first of all, development in general. The building of more stock is going to be crucial, and it's not even about price point. It's just having more options, and then we can figure out the math on the back end of it, kind of as you move along. But I think the other part, and this is where we have a little bit of a different approach in Kentville, and we've started it about a year ago, where both, you know, you see recreation, you see the police, you see all of our departments. We kind of are part of a bit of, and I like the way that the director brought it forward, is kind of this dignified approach of, we're a little bit of intake, which has never been really something we really kind of been doing, which is finding a little bit of information out in a way that's respectful. And then, is there a way we can pair folks up with those resources that are out there? We're not the experts in a lot of this. But it's a piece we worked on a year ago this summer with the nonprofit community. And I think, you know, part of what we're trying to do with that Kentville Housing Action Plan is some of those pieces around the edge that can help those organizations do just a little bit more than we become a referring agency, as opposed to, you know, becoming experts in those things that these folks are already experts in. So I think, you know, those pieces are all going to come together where we start to take a bite into this, but it's, the unfortunate part is, A, it won't be quick, and B, the pressure on every level of housing stock is there. So those with and without money, there is pressure on the housing stock. And so I think some of those pieces is there gaps that as a municipality, we're going to have conversations that we'll bring to council to talk about, are the places where we need to put our toe in the water, because if not us, then who?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councillor Gerard.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Director Bedingfield. Quick question about, you talk about the arena. Have we ever had an assessment done on like the arena and the pool and some of our other aging recreational things that this is the longevity and this is how much it would take, you know, to bring things, I don't want to say up to snuff, but you know, a timeline on this is gonna last you this long and that's it, and then you're into this much money to fix or rebuild?
So I think you're getting to asset management. Yeah, and
Yeah.
so that's something that we have been working on. And I would expand that to also include whether or not the current facility meet the needs of the community in terms of our growing demographic, in terms of our changing demographic, and also in terms of accessibility. So it's kind of like there's the longevity of the pieces within the arena, the structure itself. Is it accessible? Does it meet safety standards? All these different things. So it's certainly something on our radar. And from an asset management perspective, yeah, that's something that we're taking a look at. I don't know. This wouldn't have been circulated to council, so I apologize, and we can do that after. But there was that report that just came out from the province around aging recreation infrastructure in this province and all across the country, and it is another version of a pandemic in the way that everywhere is, everybody's meeting their ends because the last infusion of large amounts of money was Centennial. And that's why there's so many things called Memorial or Centennial, because that's when it was invested in. So I think that all levels of government are very aware of it. But yeah, we do need to start making decisions about if it's worth investing in bits and pieces and picking away at it, or something else.
Thank you. One more comment or question, if I could. I see you're looking for a couple new positions. Have you done any, made any phone calls or any analysis on industry standards on either salary or what I'm trying to get at is you don't want to hire someone who you train and then they turn around and go, I've got a job with a different company now because they're offering $1 or $2 more an hour.
Yeah. And that is, again, back to my comments, that is one of our pieces where it's certainly within parks, we're bound within the QP contract, what we're able to offer. And this is one of the things that is our biggest wall that we're coming up against. Yeah.
Thank you.
CEO?
I think one of those things that obviously we've got, I believe, a year on the existing QP contract that we have. But one of the parts of our budget conversation we will have this year, as we start to talk about the town expanding, what's the right resource complement and what will that look like as we move forward? And so everything from plowing of the streets to mowing of the grass and whatnot, because the pieces you see as the town has grown in population and has grown in the number of units that's here, as that accelerates, and it's going to accelerate fairly rapidly, I think that piece of our budget conversation will be one we'll really want to make sure that we get crunchy on sooner than later. And I think it's valuable to tie that into, are we talking about, the age of the rink? Are we talking about some of the infrastructure issues? And I think it will be one where we'll try and put some data together for council so you can have that as part of the budget conversation.
Thanks to you. Thank you, Director. Very thought-provoking report this time around. So you have a report on the ravine for us next.
This is around the green spaces in Huntsville.
Okay,
but the
so just
ravine is
green
part of it.
spaces. So are you doing ravine and gorge all at the same time,
I'm
or?
just throwing it all together.
Alrighty.
It's like a little.
We're
potluck
going there
thing.
with you.
Yeah, all right. So you do have in front of you a little bit of a memo, and it's building off of what Dr. Herman had presented earlier to you. But just this idea that Kentville Parks and Trail Systems are such a valued part of the Kentville community, and I think we were all probably painfully aware of this when they were taken away from us during the pandemic, when there was this kind of uprise that this is not fair. We need to access our green spaces to better our mental health, to pull our community together. This is where we feel safe seeing other people. And then what we saw recently when the Kenful Ravine was taken away from us because of the slump site and it's no longer safe to access that, I would say that we continue to get calls, sometimes daily, weekly, with people concerned about what is going on, when can I access this space? And we start to call, this is like the community is mourning for these spaces. As we continue to grow and expand, much like facilities, our parks and trails also need to be evaluated. We see more people around the marsh than ever before. And what impact does that have on the marsh, for example, a protected wetland, when we have a greater population? So does this mean that we need to have restrictions? Does this mean we need to talk about park expansion? All of these things are something that we looked at. And then building off of what Tom was talking about earlier, we also have all of these ecological, we'll call them threats, that we also need to take into consideration. One of the things that is important to note is that it is not common for municipalities to be at the table when it comes to leading the way in terms of addressing invasive species. And that's something I think that we can be really proud of, but also to acknowledge that we've been pulled here because the community has asked us to do that. And having a group like the advisory committee of the Kenful Ravine, which is kind of a branch of the Friends of the Kenful Ravine. We've got Blomner Naturalist Society, we've got Gigi Walk Talk. We have all these organizations out there that are kind of the watchdog and are here to support us. You can see I spend a lot of my time surrounded by really smart people, so I don't have to know the answers, but it's quite beneficial. When we put out a call to say that there was a woolly adelgid coming and it was going to, it hadn't yet hit the ravine, but we were worried that we would, immediately a GoFundMe page started. If you remember, Christiane was here in front of you with no effort at all. She was able to raise $10,000. More money was being donated through Blomner Naturalist Society. And this is without pushing it, without talking about it, because for almost a year, we've been working on pulling the plan together that was presented to you this evening. So all of this being said is that the green spaces in Kenful are unbelievably a valuable source to our economic well-being, to our mental health, to our community well-being. People come here for them. It increases property value. It saves energy, all these different reasons why it's so good to invest in these things. And now we're being called to save them so that we don't lose them. Tom was saying that the gorge is 70 years old. Before that, it was a pasture land. We could essentially have the gorge turn back into pasture land if we don't address these things. So the numbers in front of you, I just broke down what was in Tom's report, including the fact that we have, there has been money fundraised. What I am saying is that because we're working in real time here, I'm committing to bringing to you before council at the end of the month the entire picture when it comes to what the actual ask is for the town, because we're still trying to work things out, because there is so many people putting in fundraising efforts, and we need to pull that number together so that you have the information you need to make the decision. And that was that memo. I just wanted to update you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Director Bedingfield. And we look forward to seeing something for decision-making at council on October 24th. So thank you for that. Are there any questions with regards to this green space memo? Councillor Gerard.
Just one quick question. In regards to the ravine, have we been sort of left on our own by the people who were gracious enough to lease us the land for a long time? Or are they willing to step in at all with some funds and help start the cleanup on that?
So what I can tell you about the cleanup, and I mentioned this briefly in my report, is that there was a meeting that was held 2 weeks, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. Time's irrelevant at this point in time. And we were actually all invited to go and sit in, and they gave us an update around what they had done. We also toured the site. So where the slump had happened and all that land had come in, it has been cleaned up. The ravine itself has kind of been put back together, so it looks like a river. It has, the trail has been put in there. They're still monitoring toxicity within the water, and they've committed to doing that for at least 3 years, which is really great. There is still garbage everywhere. in the ravine, throughout the ravine. And we're in talks about communicating with them around how we will address that. It is currently still not safe to open to the public for that reason. Yeah, I think what I can say about that is when the ravine, and I'm hopeful, is able to open to the public, it will not be the same. We will have to treat it as a disaster site. And this is what happens when human impact meets weather, essentially, is what happened. Currently, the town has had no involvement in the cleanup. They have put out the tender, they've hired the firm to do that, they have all of that information, they did all the testing. None of that has been released. I don't have access to that information. I will still keep pushing for that. Also, when we talk about biocontrol that Tom was talking about, there's conversations around what that would look like should the woolly delgid ever show up. That's on their plate as well. So from a town perspective, it's really around when are we comfortable kind of moving forward? How do we want to move forward as a community? It was very much noted at that event that shutting out the town from or the community, I should say, from the happenings is just, it's not okay. Again, back to ecological mourning, this idea that people are grieving for what they had. It's a real thing. We hear it all the time when people come in. So how do we continue to work together? How do we build that relationship, and how can we safely access the ravine are all topics. But I would say in terms of opening, it certainly will not happen this year.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Director, you have one more report, anti-racism charter in recreation for us.
Thank you. I'm on a roll tonight. It's crazy. So this also is in real time because the town of Kenville, excuse me, was invited to sign the Anti-Racism Charter for Recreation Nova Scotia. So I want to give you a little bit of an overview of that project. And I'm reading from their release. So there's been an escalation of racist and discriminatory behavior in recreation sector locally and nationally. The impacts of these incidents on the psychological health and well-being of those affected are serious and is made worse by lack of supports available. In response to this, Recreation Nova Scotia, with funding from the Department of Canada Heritage, is working with Wisdom to Action to develop an anti-racism charter. The charter will provide unifying guidelines for the recreation sector to address and combat systemic racism within the sector. I'm sure that the idea that racism happens in recreation settings is not new to anyone here. It's all over the news. Sometimes we see it spray painted in our parks. But it is real. And Recreation Nova Scotia reached out to us directly to be the first municipality signatory on this charter. And they're doing that because they are seeing that we are doing some action, certainly linked with our accessibility action plan, which is really great. I just have one, I think it's on page 8 of the document that I sent you. But signatories to the Anti-Racism Charter will undertake the following actions and commitments. So acknowledge and address racism. Part of that is that we need to talk about it. We need to have community conversations about it. We need to, and we need to address it, both from a community development lens and a punitive lens. Provide ongoing training and education opportunities. Certainly we've been working on this for staff. We also need to be able to provide these workshops for our community. Building racially representative communities. I don't know if anybody was at Harvest Fest, but it was pretty awesome. We had whole tables of people carving pumpkins who didn't speak English, who had never carved a jack-o'-lantern before, and which, now that I think about it through that lens, it would be really creepy, but they loved it. It was great. We are a changing demographic, and we need to catch up to that and understand the benefits of multiculturalism that brings to the community. Acknowledging that, we are working in Mi'kma'ki, that we have African heritage here, all of these different pieces are part of that. The last part is design equitable and inclusive opportunities. Of course, you know that we're doing that all the time in recreation. We will continue to do that. It's part of the way that we work. It's part of the EDI sport and community consultant. It's part of our Recreation for All policy. It's ingrained in how we do our things from a recreation perspective, and it's becoming more ingrained in how our town operates. So, that being said, we have been asked as the town of Kentville, and I will be heading to Halifax next Wednesday to sign on behalf of the town, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention, and that we should all stand up and celebrate and be proud, and then continue to hold ourselves accountable.
Well done, well done.
That's what I'm gonna say in my speech.
I'm going to say, Rachel, that you change us for the better. You make us think about things. I'm going to say you're 8 to 80. I don't think I go to a conference where I don't talk about that. And just the language that you've given us to say the things that we need to say is so meaningful every single day. So thank you for the work that you and your gang downstairs do for us on a daily basis, because it is significant in the way that we operate. So thank you for that. Councillor York.
Yes, sorry, I know we've been here a long time and I apologize.
in
So
it.
in the first step, it says acknowledge and address racism. Do you know if there's any work to be done or what the plan is for repairing the relationships that have been previously broken?
You mean provincially, or here?
Yeah, like I know that we are working on things, but we also operate within provincial organizations,
Yeah.
like Hockey Nova Scotia, all those sorts of things.
Oh, are they on the news?
So those things change, or so we can control what we can control, but are there bigger steps happening to repair the relationships that were broken or not yet formed because of previous damage?
Sorry, you mean provincially? Or
Yes.
within yeah. So this charter came about because Recreation Nova Scotia actually formed an anti-racism committee, and they've been touring the province. Before that, the organization actually went around and took the shared strategy for recreation for the province to all of the Mi'kmaq communities, which had never been involved in the original making of the plan. And a lot of stuff came out, including that recreation doesn't even translate into Mi'kmaq. So how are we talking about it, and what does free time mean? So it's continual work. I've actually been really proud of the sector in a lot of ways. I think the pandemic has pushed it in a place that people are probably trying to catch their breath on, because we've been called to action so many times. I think recreation is a leader in a lot of ways, broadly speaking. And then we have our relationship with sport, and what's happening now is that sport and recreation are more and more starting to work together. The other piece is that most folks don't even know that the sport and recreation sectors are two totally different sectors. And then we have physical activity, which is also a third sector. So yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of working together. Yeah, having the EDI community sport consultant in the town for the region is groundbreaking in many ways. And Grayson will be a part of this charter. Grayson's getting an award at Recreation Nova Scotia, and that's overlying with what's happening here. Yeah. So do I think that there's been lots of work done? I do. Do I think we have eons still to go? 100%. Yeah, both as a sector, both as a town, both as a department, all these things, and as individuals.
Thank you.
Anything further on this for the director? Phew, you're off the hot seat.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Chief.
Always nice to follow Rachel.
Yeah. We have,
Good evening, everyone. I have submitted a number of reports to the board for the month of September, and I believe you all have copies of those reports. I have not yet discussed these with the board, but I'm open to any questions you may have. The highlights are already addressed by the Director of Finance. We have some financial pressures. Other than that, there's nothing significant in September's reports. Are there any questions?
all right, thank you, Chief. Councillor Gerard.
Just one quick question. I know we started doing a replacement of a vehicle and have a sort of a 3-year rotation. Are we, are they still, I don't want to say unattainable, but are they still a long time off?
So we have this year's replacement now, so it's about 6 months behind. So I expect no different for next year. So once the budget's approved and we get another one, hopefully in the capital budget, we'll probably be 6 months behind on that one as well. So it seems to be about 6 months to get them in, get them upfitted, and then get them on the road.
How are the vehicles now? Are there any issues with maintenance or?
No, it's not as bad as last year. So we have 2 of the 3 are basically new this year. So we still have issues with the new ones, but they're fixed by the dealership relatively quickly. And we have some upkeep for the one to be cycled out next year, but not significant like it was last year. So we should be pretty good that way.
Perfect, thank you.
Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
I have a question. Later on tonight, we're going to be talking about in a second reading for bylaw for chickens, going into the animal control bylaw. And I know that your department is responsible for enforcement of the animal control bylaw. And so I'm wondering if you have a plan for enforcement. I know you get some dog calls and you get some probably cat calls, but I'm sure we've never had any chicken calls. So I'm wondering if you could speak to us a little bit about that.
So my view is certainly the bylaw enforcement officer will be primarily responsible for the bylaw enforcement. It doesn't mean that the police from time to time are not called to deal with bylaw issues. So we've had about 132 calls actually in the last 2 years for bylaw-related issues. There is a service delivery gap for sure when it comes to the animal control bylaw, when it comes to enforcement. It's one thing to have a dog in a car or a barking dog complaint. It's a whole other thing to have a vicious dog or chickens at large, I guess, for a lack of a better term. So no, there's no plan in place currently for chickens running at loose in kennel. I'm not sure, to be honest, who actually would be suited to do that. We've inquired with other service providers about possibly getting a contract. We've been unable to secure one just yet, but certainly it's a gap the CIO and I've talked about. I just don't have a solution to this point. Certainly if there's a violation of a bylaw, that can be followed by the bylaw enforcement officer. A more static, I guess, type of call, that's not an issue. But yeah, for chickens running at large, I'm not sure what we're going to be doing about that.
So it would, we could expect that it would take away from the regular duties of police officers to go and answer these types of calls?
So it depends on, it depends on the nature of the call. So yes, if for example, we received a call that there was numerous chickens running around, we would certainly go and investigate. I'm not sure we'd have any mechanism to capture chickens, bring them back and put them anywhere. It's probably something that we would follow up with the owners, but yeah, there's no capacity right now to capture chickens and bring them back to somewhere, or a place to store them for that matter.
Okay, so I'm not really talking about chickens at large. I'm talking about numbers of chickens in a coop and whether the coop fits the property size. Would your members be willing to go out and measure the property size and make sure the number of chickens?
It wouldn't be
fits
my
that?
intention of police officers doing that anyway. It would be a
Yeah.
bylaw enforcement officer that would do that.
Okay.
Even if it happened at nights or weekends, that's something that could wait, and I would have a bylaw enforcement officer do that. The best skill they could, I guess, given the circumstance.
Okay, so the bylaw enforcement officer, we only have one.
Correct.
So that would take away from some of the duties that the bylaw enforcement officer is already doing.
Correct. So the bylaw enforcement officer's role, as I understand, has been expanding over the last couple of years from parking enforcement to various bylaws.
Right.
So certainly, the current staff member, who's very energetic and very competent, I would suggest, and able, has taken on more and more responsibility. So as the bylaws evolve, so do the duties of the bylaw enforcement officer. So at present, it's certainly unsightly premises or noise or mostly parking, I guess. But now that would expand, I would suggest, as the bylaws expand.
Okay, so if it's too much, if we're getting close to a lot of these bylaws, then would we foresee maybe a second bylaw officer being hired to carry out those duties?
Certainly, so that would be based on evidence. Obviously, calls for service would dictate. So we have to assess as to what the duties of the bylaw, and as you know through the board, we do a monthly report for the bylaw officer. And he's very good at detailing his reports. So we have a pretty good understanding of what his day-to-day duties are. So right now, it would be a trade-off between visibility downtown and parking enforcement and bylaw enforcement. As time goes on and as the bylaw duties increase, I would expect that we would look at alternate staffing models for sure.
Okay.
And obviously that would come to the board
Right.
with that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor York.
Thank you. Hi, Chief.
Hi.
While I really appreciate you being here and all the work that you do to give us your presentations, I'm wondering if it's possible to have Ashley Ettinger come and present to us as well, the Community Crisis Navigator, at some point. Again, appreciate your information and all the information you provide, but I'm wondering if we could get a special presentation sometime.
Absolutely. So I did speak to her about that today, actually going to the board, hopefully, the next board meeting, which hopefully is in November.
Perfect.
I will leave it to, I guess, the board to decide if it's the appropriate venue for here or for council or for both. But definitely I want to get her in front of people to understand what her impact has been, which has been significant. So that's more coming from me on that for sure.
That was very serendipitous. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Looks like no more questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next up is Department of Engineering and Public Works with Director Bell.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll start, as I usually do, with the Water Commission update. I'm both happy and relieved to report that our long-awaited replacement well pump was installed last week. This means that all 7 wells are now fully functional again, and we have a complete spare pump on the shelf for either the new well to be drilled this fall or a replacement pump in case another well goes down, or pump goes down, I should say, in the meantime. Due to delivery issues and delays and supply chain troubles, the Water Commission planned to replace this shelf pump as soon as the current one is put into service on a go-forward basis. So we always have a spare and aren't waiting upwards of 3 or 4 months to get a new pump when we go without one. It puts certainly an extra strain on the other wells and labor time. Staff have to come out and operate certain pumps manually, and takes us out of the automatic system that we are so used to using. Sanitary sewer area service, operationally there were no issues with the service this past month. Moving on to projects, I'll give a quick update on the McDonald Avenue subdivision upgrade, one of our capital projects. Work is progressing nicely on this first phase of a 2-year project. Construction of phase 1 will focus on McDonald Avenue and the lower section of Henry Street, with the remainder of Henry Street and Brayside Drive completed next summer is phase 2. The AT project, as a subcomponent sort of tender of the AT project, the second lift of Burke subdivision was paved on September 30th to complete the project that was started in 2021. The downtown AT connector and other components, such as the curb and sidewalk repairs and replacements on Park Street and Main Street in front of Ultramar and Headliner Studio, and upgrades to the curb along a curb and sidewalk along the West Main Street from the trail entrance to Main Street is set to begin in the coming days. So you'll see lots of that happening on the various parts of the downtown AT connector. As a follow-up to September's council meeting when we discussed some additional patch paving and sidewalk repair, I spoke on the phone last week with the contractors and talked again today. So they've been given sort of a list of some of the key areas that will still require patch paving with that additional budget monies added, and we're going to actually look tomorrow at some of the sidewalk areas. Specifically the area on bottom part, north end of Canaan Avenue, that section of sidewalk that is certainly in need of repair, replacement, upgrades, and a section on Klondike Street. Our EV charger arrived last week, and the Public Works guys were in today to pour the base for that over in our back parking lot here. Nova Scotia Power, with all the repairs and outages across the province, mostly up in Cape Breton and Northumberland side, they've delayed. There's been delays certainly with their other work and a shortage of power poles. So we're probably looking at least the end of the month before that charger can be energized. But it did arrive last week. And that's sort of, a quick summary of my report.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Director Bell. Are there any questions for the director on this report? Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Director Bell. I believe that this is under your purview. The VIA station is getting some roofing done. Will that be done before the winter sets in, do you think?
that facility really isn't, but I was tasked by CAO Troke to put it to tender, so we did do that a month and a half or so ago. It's been awarded, colors have been picked, and the shingles are ordered. So, yeah, I was speaking to the contractor today, and they expect to start within the next 2 weeks. It'll be a three-day kind of project. sort of
Yeah,
thing.
is that a full roof shingling, or is it patching?
It's a stripping and reshingling,
The whole
complete,
thing.
yeah, and the new roof vents on the rear that were a potential source of water intrusion, and a removal of the there's some old sign base on the roof, so, yeah, complete new roof.
Okay, great, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Counselor Zabian.
Thank you. Thanks, Director. This might be for the CAO, or one of you, I guess. The EV charger, just to confirm, that's been set up as pay-as-you-go, correct? Whoever.
So my understanding is in the discussion with council is that this need to be cost recovery. The exact pricing on that in this moment hasn't been set, but that was my understanding of the direction where council wanted to go.
Okay. When do you think you might have a answer to that?
Well, I think what you see in the briefing note is what our estimate is. And I guess, a little bit is based on usage. So I think once we have a couple of months worth of data, then we can look at if we need to do any tweaking of it at that point in time. But I think based on what you saw in the briefing notes that were presented, that would be what we would see as a reasonable cost recovery measure. And then we get up and running, we'll have a little better answer for you.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions for the director? All right, Director, looks like we're going to talk about a dump truck.
Part 2, yeah. So this is a request for pre-approval to order a replacement single-axle dump truck, plow truck, salt truck, multi-purpose truck. I mean, it's used throughout the year, but very much so in the winter months as a snowplow and salt truck. So Public Works typically replaces our trucks and other heavy equipment through the capital investment program after the asset reaches the 10-year mark. Although this has been common practice by many municipalities and the province, many pieces of equipment are not lasting the full 10 years without very expensive rebuilds, which is what we've experienced with both of our salt trucks. This is the case. So the current oldest single-axle dump truck is a 2013, and this would be its last winter of use, ideally. Our newer truck is a 2016. So the current build and lead time for a single-axle dump truck to fit our specifications is in excess of 12 months. In order to expect delivery of this necessary replacement equipment by next winter, tenders would need to go out at the end of October after the next council meeting, should this request be approved. Policy implications, it requires council's approval to pre-order equipment before the next fiscal year's budget is passed. Guess I'm ready for a recommendation.
All right.
May I read that?
Yep,
Mayor
go
Snow?
right ahead.
Recommendation is that Council Advisory Committee recommend for approval $400,000 for the purchase of a replacement single-axle dump truck, complete with dump body and plow and wing gear, with delivery and payment not expected until fall of 2023. This $400,000 would be budgeted in the 23-24 capital investment program, with funding coming from a combination of the equipment reserve fund, capital reserve, and long-term borrowing once the 23-24 budget is finalized.
Thank you, Director. And our motion would be that CAC recommend approval to council of $400,000 funding for the purchase of a replacement single-axle dump truck, complete with dump body, plow and wing gear, and further that funding be pre-approved for the 2023-2024 capital budget year under capital investment program, with delivery of equipment not expected until fall of 2023. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Maxwell, thank you. It has been moved and seconded that CAC recommend approval to council of $400,000 funding for the purchase of a replacement single-axle dump truck, complete with dump body, plow, and wing gear, and further that funding be pre-approved for the 2023-2024 capital budget year under capital investment plan with delivery of equipment not expected until fall of 2023. Is there any discussion on this matter? Councillor Savage.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. So it talks about the funding coming from a combination of the equipment reserve, capital reserve, and long-term borrowing. Do we have a sense of what that might look like? I know it's looking ahead, but what that might look like? Do you think we could pretty much take most of it from reserves, or will we probably have to borrow a portion? And I can look at Deb as well.
Well, and I think I'll channel the director on that one, is it'll depend on what's in the mix.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about that budget at that time. One of the things that I think we do need to take into consideration is this 10-year replacement window may not be the window we're going to be using going forward. We're just not getting 10 years out of the vehicles. And that seems to be consistent amongst what we're hearing from other units that are using this. So the way in which we set our reserves and pay for these, we might need to think about changing that mix a bit. Now, the other part, of course, is that some of the vehicles that have come through, some are more known to have issues than others. So, the other part is that you might have a vehicle that we purchase and that a 10-year window might be exactly what you would expect to see. So there's going to be a little bit of taking a look to see how this new equipment, when it comes in, how it handles. I think, though, it would be reasonable for us to rethink our 10-year capitalization of these, likely down to 8, until we start seeing better results from overall product.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Councillor Gerard.
Thank you, Worship. Director Bell, just wondering if the truck that's looking to get replaced, if there's a residual value, and how is the market? I guess the market's pretty strong for all vehicles, so we should be able to hopefully sell it.
We will definitely attempt to sell it. A 10-year-old truck, the body now is 20 years old because it came off of a previous truck, so it's already well past its due date. It's been back to the welding shop many times to the body, wing, So the truck itself is 10. The body has been on 2 trucks now, so it's pushing 20. So we did get 2 uses out of that body, and so the truck itself, the new truck we're expecting to cost about $240. The body and plow gear about $160. That's where the $400 comes from. I'd be shocked if we got more than $15,000 out of a 10-year-old truck, just because they're
When we get rid of it.
We get rid of it, and if we get
done.
that. Yeah, it's, the maintenance on them now is, you can spend that much, you can spend $25 a year trying to keep them on the road, and
being a salt and plow truck, there's nothing on there that's worth saving and throwing out back behind
no,
the thing.
the older trucks had less features, but they were more reliable. Now with all the electronics, that's what goes on them too, not just mechanically, but it's the Tier 4 emissions that makes them just very expensive to keep past that 8-year mark, sort of thing. But
Thank you.
we will get rid of it.
Are there any further questions for the director or the CAO on this matter? Are you ready for the question? The question is that CAC recommend approval to council of $400,000 funding for the purchase of a replacement single-axle dump truck complete with dump body, plow, and wing gear, and further that funding be pre-approved for the 2023-2024 capital budget year from the capital investment program with delivery of equipment not expected until fall of 2023. The monitor's blank on our side.
Is it?
so- They went to sleep.
There you go.
All right, voting is now open. No, it's not. Voting is now open? Okay. The machine hates you tonight.
Alarm's going off.
There we go. Okay, voting is now open. Voting is now closed, and the motion is carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, Director Bell, all you have to do now is wait till the end of October before we order that truck, yeah, exactly. All right, moving on now to our admin report. CAO, if you could provide us with your report, please.
Thank you, Mayor Snow, and as you can see, I'm surrounded by a whole lot of really hardworking people who are getting a lot of stuff done. And so we've covered off the surplus. Lead times for purchases are increasing across the board. In the middle of this, we've had an opportunity for some training, so all the town staff have participated in a sexual harassment training session. Intermunicipal service agreements, there's been meetings of the interim board, and you're going to have a document coming forward to council around the ICIP funding. The deputy clerk has been in contact with the utility review board for the preliminary review of the submission around boundaries. Pace and animal control bylaw are returning for review. We've also had an opportunity last week to meet with the Provincial Valuation Services consultant who is doing a little bit of work around what PVSC do and some of the things they're trying to do as they move forward. The chief and I had an opportunity to attend a meeting in Truro with the Department of Justice and with colleagues from across the province. One of the pieces that's going to come out of this, and there'll be some briefing materials that myself and the chief and some common briefing materials are going to come about, which is some of the changing things that are happening, not just in police, but more importantly, there's a lot of conversations around service exchange that are happening between the province and the RCMP. And so we want to make sure that all the councils are up to date on that. So the police force and their boards are doing what they need to do on that front, but also to make sure the information comes through to council. So councils, when you have an opportunity to not just have a conversation, but conversation even on a political lens with the province or with the federal government representatives, you'd be up to speed on whatever some of those issues would be. So those are going to be coming forward with some efforts put together between the CAOs and chiefs as we move forward.
Thank you, CAO. Are there any questions for the CAO? Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. CAO, I have two questions. I'm wondering if there are any plans to caulk the windows around the, in the VIA station before the winter sets in. They're quite bad, and I don't know if they're leaking, but they probably will after this winter session.
Thank you, Councillor. I think last year Jerry might have gone down and taken a look at it, but it is probably time to do an assessment on those as well. I know there was a little bit of caulking and a little bit of painting done. And at that time, we had done the assessment and said the roof was going to need more than a patch job. So certainly, as we can free up a body to go down and take a look at it, we'll take a look at that.
Okay, good, thank you. And secondly, I'm wondering about the Heritage Committee and the bylaw. I'm just wondering, have we had a good number of applications for the committee, and when will the bylaw come back to council? Just wondering.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't know the number that's come through. There's been some interest, but I also think that it's one of those things where the first or second advertisement's gone out, but sometimes what kind of happens is as we get it out there 2 or 3 times, all of a sudden the numbers will go up more exponentially. So by the time we get to council, hopefully I'll have a better answer for you than that.
Okay, and any idea when we'll bring that bylaw to council?
As soon as we have a number of bodies that we can bring forward for council to look at it from a committee perspective, then we can get moving.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions for the CAO? None? All right, great. So staff reports have been presented and are now part of the record of this meeting. And that moves us into unfinished business. And our first matter in unfinished business is the animal control amending bylaw. And thank you very much, staff. CAO, if you could provide us with an update on this matter.
Thank you very much, Mayor Snow. So as a follow-up to our last time when we had some conversation about the changes, there's been a review and some conversations with a number of other jurisdictions around the introductions of chickens into the animal control bylaw. And so what you see in my briefing note, there's a section here which we call discussion. And so basically the way to frame this up is most other jurisdictions, and there's very much similarities, and when you see what we're proposing and when you look at those other ones, is that what we're looking at is fairly consistent, but more importantly, they treat the introduction of the concept of chickens as this is more of not a homesteading operation as opposed to that of commercial rules. And so what happens, and our understanding has been that there's a lot of groups who are connected, everyone from the SPCA to online supports, that are there from a training, from providing advice perspective for those who are looking at having a number of chickens or a small flock. And you don't treat it as a commercial operation, which you would see an agriculture or many more of the bodies who govern that, who would come forward and say, here's what you should do and should not do. So in your package tonight, you've got essentially a number of things. First, you've got a clean copy of what would be proposed as the bylaw. We have what would be the proposed amendments. So rather than a strikeout version of this, you have the amendments that is about a 2-page document there. And then lastly, we've also included a series of documents in which you see most jurisdictions. So when you see even like the city of Vancouver, who has put together a number of resources for folks who are either looking at getting involved with having a small flock, you have questions or whatnot. And so these online resources are what normally are the pieces that folks would look into as they were looking to get into this. And municipal units usually put these up as companion pieces for folks, and then also being able to look at that when you get into it, or when you're looking at how you're going to deal with your flock, to then also compare that to the fact that here is this bylaw that a municipal unit puts up. And so there's even a statement in here by the Nova Scotia SPCA with the 5 freedoms and humane treatment for chickens. So I guess when we were last together, there was some conversation around the backyard chicken experts. And the answer is that as we talk to folks, it is more about a group of individuals who are treating this more as a homesteading piece as opposed to a commercial operation, and that in its size and nature, much of the resources that are out there are folks of similar interests and similar background who provide advice for folks who are either looking to get started or who may be having challenges as they move forward. The bylaw that is here tonight very much mirrors what you see in 3 or 4 other jurisdictions that we looked at here in Canadian bylaws, and thus we felt this was a little more comprehensive package than I guess we had the last time when we were having conversations on this.
All right, CAO, thank you very much. So we do have a recommendation that CAC recommend first reading to council of the animal control amending bylaw at the October 24th, 2022 council meeting. Someone could move that, please. Councillor Zabian and Councillor Huntley for the second. Thank you. It has been moved and seconded that CAC recommend first reading to council of the animal control amending bylaw at the October 24, 2022 council meeting. Is there any discussion on this matter? Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I'm wondering if, I'd like to make an amendment to this bylaw. In light of our discussions at the last meeting, where, you know, I brought up information from a veterinarian saying the correlation between the number of chickens and the number of rodents is 100%. We've had some information from the police chief now saying that this is going to add on to the expectations of the bylaw officer, and we may need to hire another bylaw officer. I don't think that we can have chickens in town without controls, without somebody checking those coops, without somebody making sure that things are being done correctly, because we can't assume that people in town are going to follow the rules. And so I think that we need registration, we need to know where those chickens are, and we need a small fee perhaps to help with deferring the cost of that bylaw. I would like to support a few chickens in town, but between 10 and 20 chickens in a residential neighborhood, you take McDougall Heights and you start putting, you know, chickens on properties up there, and where residents are not very far from one another. I think we're just asking for trouble. And, 2 to 4, the way it was before, I could probably get behind. But the way this is right now, there's just no controls on this. It's wide open, left open to volunteering. And expecting people to do the right thing, which I know will not happen because it's already not happening. And so I think we need to amend. So I'd like to make an amendment. I'd like to say 2 to 4 chickens with registration and a fee.
Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. We have an amendment to the bylaw, so we will put that to a vote as an amendment. What's the wording of the amendment? The amendment is to reduce the number of chickens to 2 to 4 with registration.
And a fee.
And a fee.
2 to 4?
Yep.
A range of 2
2-4.
Yeah. And you're going to move that, Councillor?
Yes.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
And Councillor Zabian seconds that amendment. So we have, it has been moved and seconded that we make an amendment to the animal control amending bylaw to change the number of chickens to 2 to 4 with registration and a fee. Yep, just give, we've got that. Okay, so any discussion on that matter, Deputy Mayor?
Okay, thank you, Worship. So there was a motion made, and it was seconded, and then it was open for discussion.
That's right, so we have an amendment.
But wouldn't the discussion first finish on the first motion?
No, because this will change the bylaw if this passes, then it changes the bylaw that we're discussing. So this is an amendment to the motion, which is first reading of the bylaw as presented.
Right, because it's not about the content, okay.
Right.
Okay, so my question was around, so when we look at a maximum of 25 chickens on a property 10,000 square meters and larger in area, are there very many lots in the town of Kentville that would be 10,000 square meters?
CEO?
That was the part that stuck out to me, and then the enforcement piece, so,
Right.
yeah.
So that would be a very big lot.
Yes, it's massive.
And no, now we do have some properties that would. And we even have a few of them that even, I'm going to say have, typically when you get into that larger lot size, might even have an animal or two already. So it's not your typical thing that you would see within, that would not be a subdivision, that would be a larger lot typically when you get into that.
Okay, and so, and the bylaw enforcement piece, and that was, I had this written down, if they were to exceed these numbers, then they would be shut down, or they would be, or reduction, but by the sounds of what the police chief was saying tonight, it's difficult to enforce.
So what the chief, two things I just want to clarify. So we have a bylaw enforcement officer, and the chief is saying that would be the role that it would be expanded on. And depending upon what he had for working not just on this bylaw, but any of the bylaws that would change, utilizing of that service over time, you'd assess. The second part, and the chief did touch on this, is that many communities use third-party sources. So, for example, you might have the SPCA as one of your sources. And so he did have some conversations with organizations. It is not at a place where any of those have kind of dropped that they would make sense at this moment in time to say that would be a solution. But part of the writing of this bylaw is that you could delegate an agent to do that work kind of on your behalf. So all of these are unknowns, and all of these at this moment in time is we actually don't know. Remember, the way that enforcement works is that our approach is that if you had someone who made a complaint, you would then send out the bylaw enforcement officer. So just for greater clarity, if our bylaw enforcement officer, if someone has a call about a dog, that's when you go out and check on a dog. And so the same right now would be as if there was a complaint about someone's chickens, then we would send out the bylaw enforcement officer. We wouldn't be perusing to see if people were complying or not.
Yeah, and I, sorry if I can, so when I look at, I mean, I like the fact about registration. I think that's important, I do. And I don't even mind the fee piece. But I don't know, people that have chickens, I don't know how many they normally have. Do they have 2? Do they have 6? Do they have 10? I think we talked about that before, about a family of 4. I don't know that piece of it. So I don't know if 2 to 4 is normal for the majority of people that have chickens to lay eggs.
Yeah, and there seems to be, with regards to that number, there's quite a variance in thought. And so, there is a difference between, I'm going to use the word, the hobbyist, who does something so that, similar, do you have a small garden or do you have a large garden? Do you have 2 chickens or 20 chickens? So it depends on what your outcome you're looking for this. And I don't know if there's necessarily a right answer. It's just even in the exploration of this, we'd have conversations, and there seems to be a lot of opinion about it. So with regards to where the bylaw is, certainly the number that council wishes is the number that we'll put in place. And I don't know necessarily, though, if we said 2 or we said 10, if that's an adequate number for someone who kind of is going beyond a basic hobbyist with this, that they're looking for a certain amount of egg production, and I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Councillor Gerard.
Thank you, Worship. Just a quick question to the CAO. So when we came up with, or not we, but when the planner or staff came up with this, they hopefully reached out to other communities, and they didn't throw a dart at a dartboard to say, this is what we're gonna do. Yes, you shook your head, yes. So, in your opinion, through the chair, but Councillor Maxwell makes it sound like when this bylaw is passed, there's gonna be a run on chickens in every yard. My thought on this is it's gonna be similar to the marijuana law. The people who smoked marijuana before it was legal will continue to smoke marijuana after it's legal, and the people who don't are not gonna be running out This is my thought. And my last comment would be, when you talk about low numbers of chickens, like 2 to 4 or 4 to 6, basically the first half of this meeting talked about food security and the lack of food security that we have now. I know how many chickens it takes to produce, eggs for a family and stuff like that. And I think putting restrictions on like that is not, because the people I know that have chickens share with their neighbors. They don't sell them. But, so if you want to talk about food insecurity, I don't think that lowering this number to this is very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just for greater clarity, because you're right, Councillor, I shook my head too. We did look at what other municipal units are doing, so the language, the number, council took a vote, and the number you see in there is the vote the council took. So that's where the number that's in there came from.
Thank you.
And it's also consistent with Halifax. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. Just a few points here. Every community is different, and like I said, I'm concerned about several things. Number one, I'm concerned about the rodent situation, and I've got experience with that because I'm living in an area where there are several coops very close together, like a street apart, and my neighbors have been complaining about rodents ever since those coops went in. And so this is a fact. That's why I went to talk to the vet. And it was a large animal vet. And I asked, am I reading this correctly? That there is a correlation between the number of chickens and the number of rodents. And he said yes, 100%. And if anybody bothered to call him, I'm sure he said yes, that's exactly what he said. I'm concerned about the lack of enforcement here. If we're going to go and start measuring lot sizes to see if people are going to fall within the correct number, I know that my neighbors have discussed putting out poison to kill the rodents, which I don't like to see happening, but that is going to be a reality. So cats and dogs that may be loose or other animals are going to get into that poison if we allow large numbers of chickens. And I don't like leaving this to citizens to report on citizens. So we're not going to take an action until somebody calls in. Well, my experience in this town is that people hate calling town hall to report on complaints they have with their neighbors. And it takes a lot for somebody to do that. And I don't think we should be putting together a bylaw that is going to leave it to citizens to start reporting on citizens. And so I think we need to seriously look at that. And as for food security and food insecurity, if you go through and you read the information that CAO gave you on how to set up proper coops, humane coops, and so on, there's no way that anybody who is food insecure can put up a proper coop. It's expensive, it's costly. And so I think council needs to take those things into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I know the proposed amendment was 2 to 4 chickens, but would Councillor Maxwell consider 6 chickens?
Yeah, I guess I would go to 6. I'm certainly not willing to go beyond 6.
Councillor Zabian, you were the seconder on that.
Yeah, I'll still second that.
Okay, so can we put up to 6 instead of 2 to 4? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor York?
Yes, thank you. I want to be careful to use correlation and causation interchangeably. Correlation is not the same as causation. While I appreciate that there is a correlation between rats or rodents and chickens, there's also a correlation between human activity and rodents. So one doesn't necessarily cause the other. and we should probably be clear about that. I do have concerns about putting further restrictions on the chicken bylaw or the animal control bylaw. There wasn't, to Councillor Gerard's previous point, there wasn't a rush on chickens when we've had 2 to 4. It doesn't seem that a bylaw would make people feel conscripted to own chickens. I do have hesitations about putting further restrictions on people's use of their own property. Thank you.
All right, so if there's no further discussion on this, we will vote on the amendment. And the amendment is to change the number of chickens to 6, to have mandatory registration and a fee. Is that how you have it, Recording Secretary? Thank you. Voting is now closed, and the motion fails. So the motion on the floor is that CAC recommend first reading to Council of the Animal Control amending bylaw at the October 24th, 2022 council meeting. Councillor Zabian moved. It was seconded by Councillor Huntley. Is there any further discussion on this bylaw? Are you ready for the question? The question is that CAC recommend first reading to Council of the Animal Control amending bylaw at the October 24, 2022 council meeting. Voting is now open. Voting is now closed, and the motion is carried. All right, our next matter of business, of old business, is the PACE program. So Property Assessed Clean Energy, and it is a consolidated bylaw. CAO, if you can take us through this one.
Can do. So thanks so much, Mayor Snow. As folks will recall, we were ready to bring this forward at a previous meeting, but we noticed there was a few errors in it, mainly typos in the document itself. So we pulled it so we could clean it up. And so again, you have here essentially the proposed amendments, the piece that I'll point to, and I know we've had a little discussion on this in the past, is that we wanted to be clear on some of the charges. So things like administrative charge, things like when you're talking about interest, because you can have interest on interest. So the old bylaw did not have that in its definition or scope of definition. And where this is an effort that the PACE program has been around, so we obviously have the learnings of what's happened in a few other places. And 2, that ourselves and West Hants were moving forward with the application to FCM. So this brings us to a place where the bylaw now captures the things from learnings in other organizations and gives us some consistency with the bylaw that's being proposed in West Hants, and would then allow us to move forward with our efforts. Obviously, program design is not in this. That would come back to council, and as well as depending upon the scope of approval from FCM, that would then obviously dictate on decisions for council. So this is just at this point putting the bylaw in place that would enable moving forward should we get the green light from FCM.
Excellent. Thank you very much, CAO. So the recommendation stands that CAC recommend first reading to council of the PACE Property Assessed Clean Energy Program consolidated bylaw at the October 24th, 2022 council meeting. Deputy Mayor, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Huntley, thank you. It has been moved and seconded that CAC recommend first reading to the council of the PACE program consolidated bylaw at the October 24th, 2022 council meeting. Is there any discussion on this matter? Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. I've had a number of calls from citizens, and the question that they're asking me is, how does this program benefit the town of Kentville with regard to Nova Scotia Power also involved in providing heat pumps? So I'm just wondering if CAO could explain that for the public that's listening, why this program, how it will benefit our citizens compared to allowing Nova Scotia Power to run that.
Thank you, Councillor. I appreciate the question. So there actually is a number of pieces that out there. So there is also some new federal programs that are out there as well. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, this becomes an option. And so some of it has to do with the cost of those options. So I don't know what the going rate is for Nova Scotia Power on their heat pump program, but my expectation would be is that based upon what I've seen with the PACE program in other jurisdictions, typically it comes in at a lower interest rate. But again, to be determined, because council is going to be the ones who are going to sit and design what this is going to look like based on a report from the consultant. The other part is that many jurisdictions also look at things beyond heat pumps and look at, obviously some of those other repairs like weather sealing, insulation, some of those other parts that overall make the house more efficient that might not be eligible under a Nova Scotia Power program, but under a combined program like PACE, you might be able to do 2 or 3 things that the overall result gives you better energy efficiency than just financing the heat pump. So lastly, and at this point in time, I do not have any information back to suggest this, but I do know that some municipal units, so for example, Colchester actually had a fairly big response to things like solar panels. And I think Wolfville did as well. So depending upon what the mix is, would depend on what the answer to that would be, but my basic understanding from a perspective we're going is, if you were thinking about the things you might finance through Nova Scotia Power, my basic understanding would be these programs get designed so they're slightly less expensive. Second, what they do is they give you a better envelope of things that might be considered under the pocket of work that you're doing than perhaps something that might go through a Nova Scotia Power. So it would give you kind of the one-stop shopping for the work that you're doing in one bundle where you would make your repayments. I hope that's helpful.
I hope so too. Thank you.
Thank you.
The other interesting thing with PACE is the consultant will look at all of the programs available and you can stack funding.
Correct.
So that's something that you can't do with Nova Scotia Power, is the stacking of grants and funding. And depending if you fit in low income, there's also another funding envelope that you're eligible for through the Nova Scotia government. So you could have Nova Scotia government, the feds, and then Nova Scotia Power, and stack all of those to get your end price. All right, if there's no further discussion, are you ready for the question? The question is that CAC recommend first reading to Council of the PACE Program Consolidated Bylaw at the October 24th, 2022 Council meeting. Voting is now open. Voting is now closed, and the motion is carried. Thank you very much. CAO, we have one piece of correspondence.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Snow. So the Hopers, Pierre and Corinne have written in with regards to they made some comments with regards to the noise bylaw and some concerns around the bylaw process. And I think that's been circulated, or I believe all of council has received a copy of that.
Yes, thank you, CAO. We move on now to new business. We've been at this for 2 hours and 20 minutes. Our guests are still here. Thank you so much for sticking around. Did we need a biological break before we move on to new business? All right, so we'll take a 5-minute break. Thank you. Okay, we're back. Thank you. All right, moving on to new business. Our first matter under new business is the Frugal Moms financial request. So CAO, the council did receive a grant request from the Frugal Moms. However, the ask did not meet our criteria of our policy, and as they were looking for operational funding, not program funding. We have investigated, and as we see tonight, there's about $500 left in our grants program. However, we've also been told that we are in a projected good side of the books. So I will open it up to council. You've all heard the presentation this evening. As Councillor Maxwell pointed out at, I believe that it was our last council meeting, that, not having the fulsome discussion while we're doing the grants was missed this year. And so I offer an opportunity now for us to have that discussion. We have an ask. It's quite unusual for our normal asks. I have a copy of the request that they put in for the grants, and they were requesting $2,000. So I put that out there and open the floor. And all you have to do is hit your light. Or I can make a motion. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. And as the mayor has said, sitting around and discussing is probably better than what we've chosen to do. So I think we would have caught this, perhaps, at that time. I think the program, I would call it a program that's going on, not just operations. I would call it a program, a very well-organized program, and a far-reaching program. And so I would have supported this. Have we just been able to discuss? So I would throw my support behind their request. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Ditto to what Councillor Maxwell said.
All right, then how about if we start with a motion that CAC recommend approval to council of a grant for $2,000 to the Frugal Moms for distribution of rescued food in the Annapolis Valley at the October 24th, 2022 council meeting. Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. It has been moved and seconded that CAC recommend approval to council of a grant for $2,000 to the Frugal Moms for distribution of rescued food in the Annapolis Valley at the October 24th, 2022 council meeting. Is there any further discussion on this matter? Are you ready for the question? The question is that CAC recommend approval to council of a grant for $2,000 to Frugal Moms for distribution of rescued food in the Annapolis Valley at the October 24th, 2022 council meeting. Voting is now open. Voting is now closed, and the motion is carried. Thank you very much, ladies. We appreciate your time this evening. All right, moving on to our next matter of business. The October council meeting had a date change to November the 1st of 2022 because our normal council meeting would have landed on Halloween, so we moved it. However, this year, because of timings, the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities annual conference is 2 weeks earlier than it would normally be and commences on November the 1st, which makes us in a point of another conflict. So October is actually one of those months that had 5 Mondays in it. So the recommendation is that the October council meeting be held on Monday, October 24th, which would still be on the fourth Monday. And further, that a notice of change be published on the Town of Kentville website. And because we are in committee, I am requesting consensus on this matter rather than bringing us into a special council meeting after this meeting to approve that. So if I have consensus, if there is anyone who does not wish to move our council meeting to October 24th. please speak now. All right, we have consensus. Our meeting will be held on October 24th. So it means that you don't have an extra week to get your council reports ready, but I'm sure that that's not an issue. And CAO, if we could get something published on our website, just so the folks out there know when we're meeting. All right, phew. Our next item of business is King's Transit Authority pilot project with a, oh my gosh, I just lost the word, a TBR. Temporary borrowing resolution, whew. CAO, if you could take this over for.
Can do. So at the intermunicipal services agreement meeting with regards to the pilot, which includes the King's Transit Authority, right now there are 4 jurisdictions in Nova Scotia who are eligible under the federal provincial ICIP program for funding, and this is capital funding, for the greening of transportation fleets. So buses or infrastructure that supports buses. When you look at Annapolis Valley, which is one of the 4 that are eligible, what's on the table is an opportunity to for the contributing partners to pay 26%, and then the federal and provincial partners would pay the residual for the purchase of new buses, for the upgrade of the actual bus terminal, and any infrastructure with regards to supporting those buses. So if you think about upgrading, it may be hydroelectric or electric buses in the future, and some of the infrastructure you might need for that. So in essence, what would happen would be, in order for King's Transit to apply for this funding, which truthfully they would not be denied if they applied for it, is the eligibility to access $8.76 million in federal provincial funding towards King Transit's capital. And in order to do that, the partners, so King's, Kentville, Wolfville, and Berwick, would need to put forward a motion that essentially would be for our contribution, or 26% of that. Now, a couple of things I will say. First of all, there is a series of work in with regards to what the fleet and what the routes are going to be that needs to come back before any money gets spent. Second, the province, who is one part of this, moved the application date up to November 15th. That's the reason. Part of that, and I would only suspect, is that they're trying to get their side approved on this before it needs to go to the federal government, and there's a bunch of transit authorities are in the queue for this. So tonight, what is asked of council is that a guarantee would be for $11.95 million, of which Kentville overall would be a 20% contributor. The reality of it is Kentville is a 20% contributor, not of that entire bundle, but in order to apply and make sure that bills get paid as they need to get paid, the partners need to guarantee it, and then the funding would come in. The expected cash flow for this is actually, if approved, year 1 of this, which would be 23-24, would be funded out of reserves. And then 24-25 would first be funded out of the funding from the federal provincial grant. So real cash out the door would not begin until after that, if you think about that from a cash flow perspective. And with a debenture likely being issued in 2026. So there's kind of a big window here, and in order to get the bus moving, pardon the pun on that, is that we as partners need to all put forward this guarantee that then goes to the application process and then starts the approval process around that ICIP money, of which you would have 74% of the funding for the capital replacement of buses and infrastructure by the federal provincial partners. So essentially, that's what brings us here, and the deadline of the 15th is what brings us here today.
Thank you, CAO. So if we get a motion on the table so that we can have more discussion, that CAC recommends to council guarantee of a temporary borrowing resolution in support of an Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, ICIP, available to King's Transit Authority in the amount of $11.95 million, of which the Kentville share represents 20% at $2,390,000. And repayment of their net municipal costs based on each unit's pro rata share of the contributions to the King's Transit Authority as calculated in the King's Transit Authority Intermunicipal Service Agreement dated April 1st, 1999. Someone could move that. Councillor Huntley, thank you. And a seconder? Councillor York, thank you. It has been moved and seconded that CAC recommends to council guarantee of a temporary borrowing resolution, TBR, in support of the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, ICIP, available to King's Transit Authority in the amount of $11.95 million, of which the Kentville share represents 20% at $2,390,000, and repayment of their net municipal costs based on each unit's pro rata share of contributions to the King's Transit Authority as calculated in the King's Transit Authority Intermunicipal Service Agreement dated April 1st, 1999. Is there any discussion on this matter? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Worship. So the guarantee that we're signing for would be 2.2 million, correct?
We're essentially signing on as a partner on the 11.95.
Yep. Which
Yep.
our
Our
contribution
share
would
would
be
be
2
20%.
okay, 20%.
And that's 20% gross before the ICIP money would be then netted off.
Okay, so then in terms of, when I look at the required to commit up to 493,000 of capital components over time, that will be our portion. I guess the only trepidation that I have is that the 2.2 million of the guarantee, but it's only guaranteeing that the funds can be applied for, correct? So we in no way, shape or form
So
would be responsible for, I just would always like to see how does the guarantee read? But
Right.
that's kind of a
No,
banker in
no,
me, sorry.
Appreciate it. So three pieces say to that. Nothing moves forward unless you get the ICIP money.
Okay. then.
And so that's the premise behind the review that's being done.
Mm-hmm.
Second to that, the 11.95 is the absolute outside maximum. The reality of it is we wouldn't expect that would actually be the money that would be needed to be replacing. But then lastly, the pilot review and looking at the routes are also going to dictate, do we need 5 buses? Do we need 10 buses? And so that piece, as we get that information, will come back and we'll have a better understanding on where this is going to land. The numbers you see here are the absolute outside maximum you have to guarantee, so the federal provincial folks will consider giving you their contribution.
Okay, I understand, thank you.
Councillor Gerard.
Thank you, Worship. So over the next 6 to 12 months, the pilot will formalize and they'll be coming back with a business plan. Will that business plan include not only this is what it's gonna cost XYZ for these buses, but long-term, because we're looking at different beasts, obviously, that are there now, this is what the maintenance costs are gonna be.
Yes, so yes to that. The other piece is that the routes will determine on also the type of vehicle. So for example, if you were looking at an electric to service the corridor, once you leave that corridor, if there's a determination that Middleton or something became a place, if you couldn't service that, then you need a different type of bus for that, maybe size, maybe some kind of hybrid. And so again, that will adjust your costs and your maintenance. So I think to layer it is, yes, you're going to be going to a new kind of bus in order to go down this road. But I also think that mix will determine those costs as we move forward, because quite frankly, we just don't know right at this moment what those routes will be but also what those routes will allow for a vehicle. Because if it doesn't allow for certain types of vehicle, then they're just not on the table.
Okay, and the second thing, the County of Annapolis and Digby are not partners to the agreement, but do provide input into the pilot project. How does that work? Do they, no money, they just get to sit at the table and?
Well, so as you're aware, some folks are either a partner in the service or a purchaser of the service. And so that's a piece as we go forward. This work right now, essentially the owners of this asset are the names that are there. So as if tomorrow you disbanded the service, those are the only people who own the assets. What you're going to see though is going to be, when we talk about what the routes would be, then there's obviously who pays what. So that part gets determined. So we're kind of at the front end of the business cases you described. And we're also at the front end of what's this gonna look like 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And people will determine on what they're opting into. And if you opt in, well, then there's a price that you would pay for opting in. So right now, Valley Waste, there are purchasers of that service. They pay a fee because they're not a partner. So here's the separate fee you would pay to be involved in that.
And unlike Valley Waste, so our discussions were, Annapolis, you show your ID. There's enough time that as you're going through the lineup, you show your ID. If you reside in Annapolis, this is your price. If you reside in a member county or town, this is your price. This doesn't have the same amount, so it would have to be something, I would think, coming right from the county, because you can't say the bus is 50 cents for you, but it's $2 for you, because, right?
I would say there's going to be a number of decisions to be made. And again, the routes themselves may dictate whether you're purchasing a service or not.
Yep.
And that's a don't know right now.
Yep.
And I think the Annapolis is at the table to hear what's going on, and then they will go back and obviously make their decisions based on that. But the assets itself at this point in time, the only people who own the assets are those who are signatories to the agreement.
And the liability. Somebody had to say it. Thank you, thank you.
All right, is there any further discussion on this matter? Are you ready for the question? The question is that CAC recommends to council guarantee of a temporary borrowing resolution in support of the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program available to King's Transit Authority in the amount of $11.95 million, of which the Kentville share represents 20% at $2,390,000 and repayment of their net municipal costs based on each unit's pro rata share of contributions to King's Transit Authority as calculated in the King's Transit Authority Intermunicipal Service Agreement dated April 1st, 1999. Voting is now open. Voting is now closed, and the motion is carried. Thank you very much. We have no audience here, so we'll dispense with public comment. And council has a legal matter which must be conducted in a closed session. We require a motion to go into the closed session to discuss the agenda item, and we will not be returning to Facebook Live for completion of this meeting or for adjournment. So the motion is to move into a closed session to discuss the agenda item. Thank you. And a seconder? Deputy Mayor, thank you. It has been moved and seconded that council move into a closed session, and the question is on adoption of the motion to move into a closed session. All those in favor? Those opposed? And the motion is carried, and the time is 8:48.